Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Unipart Group, and she is a senior HR professional with a person-centric approach and focuses specifically on driving improvements within wellbeing and championing for better mental health awareness, and is working hard to support the social movement to remove stigma associated with condition in the workplace. She's going to talk about post-pandemic planning and also how it affects overall well-being. Before we start, just a bit of rules of housekeeping. If you can keep yourselves all on mute, that'd be really helpful. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box with the word with a Q before them. We'll then close and we'll then have all of the questions at the end of the session. Before I hand over to Claire for the event, I just want to talk about our next event as well, which is on the 19th of October, again at 9:30 a.m. And this is a guide to staying safe and well in the winter months, looking specifically at sleep, exercise, flu prevention, winter nutrition, PPE and health surveillance. And that will be led by Isabella Burrows, the Director and Clinical Lead. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Claire for another great IOSH Staffordshire event. Thank you all. Morning, Claire.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me along this morning. It sounded like a very grand kind of welcome in, and I hope I can kind of do it justice. So I'm just going to come off the video and I'm just going to share my screen with you and take you through my presentation. So hopefully, if someone shouts at me, you can all see my screen.
Yes, all good.
Good, good. It's always good. Okay, so as Ewan has said, I'm the head of health. I'm going to take the safety bit out. I'm the head of health and wellbeing at Unipart. I don't want to oversell it. And you know, I report into the group health and safety director, and it's very deliberate that the wellbeing stream of work has been kind of moved out of kind of the HR team and moved into health and safety, because it's very much around looking at that whole person, both psychological and physical safety, and it's giving it the importance and the credibility that it needs within the organisation to ensure that it gets the traction that it needs. As Ewan says, I am hugely passionate, and one of the main charges that I have been given within this role is to very much drive the mental health agenda, which suits me personally. I'm hugely passionate about mental health. I'm a qualified first aider. I have volunteered for a number of years now for a crisis line, Shout UK, and I'm just hugely passionate about what we can do to help support people and ensure that they can support themselves. So what I'm going to do is just give you a quick run through. As Ewan says, my background is HR, so nearly 20 years within HR, and I've now kind of come across into the health and safety team to kind of deliver this agenda. I'm hugely passionate, and the words human-centric are deliberate. Within that 20 years, I've seen a number of things that sometimes as process-orientated individuals, we forget that sometimes there is a human in the center of something that's happening. We forget that they have emotions, and sometimes that can cause them to behave in a certain way. We can't predict that. We can't process flow it. We can't put and predict that behavior in an SOP, which makes it quite ambiguous. And we have to operate in that kind of grey area. So equipping everybody to be able to understand that and signpost people is pretty much at the heart of what it is that we're doing. So I'm going to kind of give you a quick overview. I've not assumed that anyone knows who we are. I'm going to share our learning experiences. Now, I wasn't in this position through the pandemic. I've only taken this role up since May this year, but I have been doing some of the wellbeing and mental health work as an add-on to my business partnering role within the HR team. So what I take into this role and what I share with you this morning is very much what I've seen through working very closely with our people in our distribution centres. So this comes from listening and understanding what is important for our colleagues. It's not just kind of a corporate framework that says this is what we're going to do. We're going to share with you some of what we did through the pandemic to listen to our people and understand what their challenges were and how that's kind of helped shape our wellbeing strategy. I'm going to give you a quick overview in terms of our mental health agenda. Clearly, it's not static, it's very dynamic and moves, but I'll give you a snapshot as it stands today, and then just briefly talk about our next steps and plans for the future. And I'm hoping that through sharing some of this information, you may be able to take something away. I'm happy to connect afterwards and kind of answer any questions at the end of this presentation. So in terms of Unipart, sometimes when people think Unipart Group, they think British Leyland, they think automotive, and that's taken us back to kind of the 1970s. We've changed considerably since then. We operate in a number of markets and are now highly diversified, working with, as you can see on the screen, in a number of industries. So automotive is still very much at the heart of what we do, which is linked with our manufacturing division. But we also support retail customers, utilities, technology. We have the NHS supply chain logistics part of the business as well, which was a huge win for us in 2019, and clearly hugely important throughout the pandemic in terms of getting consumables to hospitals. Logistics, which is the division that kind of I've worked within the last kind of 7 years in a number of these areas. Our three major areas are logistics, manufacturing and rail. And we have a very systemized approach in terms of how we manage everything within that business, which you may have or may not have heard, but it's called the Unipart way. And it governs the way we think, lead and behave, and kind of help shape those values we hold dear as an organisation. We operate predominantly within the UK, about 6,000 strong, but we also operate in Europe, Middle East and in the United States. And we are still privately owned, which I think is a key thing here in terms of what it is we do. Everybody will have done various exercises very similar to this, and what we have looked at is kind of what are the drivers for this, in particular mental health. And it's not just about what our people need, but it's also thinking about those external pressures and the environment that we operate within, and we're all facing very similar challenges. If we think about resourcing issues that we're currently facing, and you look at some of the reports that have taken place by some of the resourcing specialists, 88% of professionals consider the mental health practice of an organisation as part of their consideration before they join. People are looking for very different things now. It's for all of us. We've all experienced probably. We've been through the same storm, but different boats is kind of what I'm going to use as a bit of a cliche. But mental health well-being is very much at the forefront of our agenda. And when we've been doing our gap analysis in terms of what we offer and what we need to focus on, our workforce is incredibly high risk. Our transport division is high risk just by the very nature of the fact that we have is predominantly male, they're predominantly over 40, and they're in sedentary roles, and they work on their own. They are probably the biggest risk kind of population we have within the organisation. Over 80% of our workforce are male. And if you think about a lot of the research in terms of those high risk categories, we can't ignore that. We have to use the demographics of our organisation to help shape our wellbeing strategy. Line managers lack the confidence, and they also lack the training in this area. There are numerous conversations I could recite where a manager is scared to ask the question. A manager has been scared of a situation because they're worried about getting it wrong. So we need to equip our managers, and we need to help support and coach them. We've looked at some of the absence data within the organisation, and I've quoted numbers for last year, for 2020, but again, they're just hours that we've had reported. That doesn't include the hours where somebody doesn't recognise that their illness actually, whilst it could be manifesting physically, is actually something that's being driven by stress or anxiety. Or actually they don't feel comfortable sharing that information with us. In comparison to that, our physical absence was in excess of 200,000 hours. So we're hoping through our agenda, we're going to shift and kind of make it a much safer environment and raise the awareness for people to kind of share this. Legally, not only the Health and Safety at Work Act, in terms of that distinguishing between mental and physical, employment legislation doesn't distinguish between them. Whether it's a mental health condition or a physical health condition, our colleagues are protected. And, if we ignore part of it, then we run the risk of an increase in discrimination claims. and that's clearly something that's not healthy for the organisation. And we work with a number of customers. We've got a number of high profile customers who are doing this. It's forefront of their agenda, and as their supply chain partner, we should be there with them. So bit of an overview in terms of some of the work we've done internally. And I know yourselves, you will have been involved in kind of auditing whereby they are expecting to see what that systemised programme of mental health intervention is. What is it we do? How do we support? It's not enough just to talk about it. We've got to do something about it. So I just wanted to share with you, rather than me talk you through it, just some of the findings from a survey that we did. Approximately 1,300 colleagues. So we will have all experienced a very similar thing in our organisations, whereby overnight we were given very little notice. People had to work from home. We can all think back to very UK centric, but we can think back to the day when we kind of watched Boris Johnson kind of announce that we were going into lockdown and we had to work from home. The majority of that 1,300 had never worked from home on a full-time basis. Some of them never done it at all. It was completely new to them. So what we wanted to do is kind of find out what their challenges were. If you compound that further with working at home with children, then clearly we had additional barriers to try and help our people get over the best way we can. And that would be something that's very common across a number of employers. So a couple of months into lockdown, we conducted a survey and we put together this short video, which was then made available to our colleagues to watch. So we were very much about kind of feeding back that information and what we were going to do with it. And I'll share that with you now. So it just gives you a summary, a bit of an overview in terms of what those results told us, and thankfully there wasn't anything too alarming through those, and you'd expect that managers would need some support in terms of managing remote workers, because that's not something they're used to having to do. Just wanted to kind of pull out one of the stats in regards to the question that we asked about whether the pandemic had negatively impacted their mental health. It was a very specific question. 39% of the respondents agreed that it had, and 11% strongly agreed. So that's nearly half of the respondents that had completed the survey that said that this is impacting me negatively. So that drove quite a lot of activity in regards to the virtual guidelines being created, putting in those kind of disconnection kind of policies, especially for those working from home with young children. Team events took place. We encouraged people to have these virtual meetings, which seem to have taken over everybody's lives. Walk and talk. So get the app on your phone, use the phone, go for a walk, get fresh air at the same time as you're kind of participating in much shorter meetings. We held a number of lunch and learns to kind of learn how we look after ourselves, and looking at what we can do if we were suffering with a level of anxiety, or just to ensure that people were getting some level of connection, because we all know that's hugely important for our well-being. And we established some regular communication channels, one of them being our Wellbeing Wednesdays, where we will share stories, colleague stories or blogs, and we found that hugely powerful to use that narrative to help reinforce some of the health and safety guidelines we were putting in place, and talking about why these things were hugely important. We had a colleague within the HR team who was hospitalised for a period of around 5 months because he contracted COVID. This was quite early doors in terms of the pandemic, and sharing his story once he was able to, and thankfully made as full a recovery as he can. Sharing his story kind of really helped reinforce some of those behavioural changes we were asking of people, because human behaviour doesn't change overnight. People need to understand why they need to work in a different way. So it was hugely powerful. So that's survey and focus groups and talking to people, combined with some of the research and the reports that were coming out from various specialist areas and charities such as Mind, and I've just shared a few statistics with you there. We've then used that to kind of help shape what we do and how we do it, and prioritise. And as you can see, the mental health piece, this is the reason why it's my main focus to start with in terms of what we do. And a big part of it, people are talking about it now. Throughout the Olympics, it was highly publicised if somebody took the decision to kind of stand down because they needed to protect their mental health. We need to use this as an opportunity to really educate people and help people understand kind of, we all have mental health, and understand the difference between everyone having mental health and then what it means if you have a mental health condition, or you're experiencing some struggle with anxiety and what have you. So what this diagram kind of shows you is kind of what we're trying to achieve, and it just shows you how far spread kind of well-being is. And it's all supported by our work with business in the community. Our wellbeing strategy is very much focused around their work well model, which is very work focused. So it looks at all the pillars that are needed within the workplace to kind of ensure that people can bring their whole selves to work and have a good day at work. So this just kind of shows you, kind of illustrates the extent of the work that we have to do. And the hashtag You Matter will be part of a campaign that we start running kind of from October onwards, when we start to launch some of our training. We've taken all of this and turned it into a deliverable action plan. So you may or may not have heard about the Mental Health at Work commitment. It follows on where the Time to Change pledge has left off. And it continues the great work and links very much into the Thriving at Work reports that Stevenson and Farmer did in 2017. It's a set of actions organised into 6 standards. And if an organisation does nothing else then prioritise the work they do around these 6 areas, then it is evidence-based that it will provide, or at least help achieve, better mental health outcomes for employees. So from that, we've done a bit of gap analysis, and we have created kind of our approach into 3 key areas that ticks off all of these 6 standards. And I'm just going to very briefly kind of talk you through the key areas. So the foundation area is very much around how we create that healthy working environment. This is where we put well-being and the health element into every interaction in our day-to-day kind of work. This is about normalizing conversation, raising awareness, and integrating, talking about health and well-being into all of our daily conversations. One-to-ones, return to works, our daily communication cells that we hold, team meetings. It's factored into our SHE plans, and we're currently building a set of metrics that will be used in our kind of SHE rep meetings site by site to kind of look at how each site are performing and what their localized measures and focus needs to be. Because as I said earlier, the framework is set. It's very much about how each site and how each site responsible general manager or leader kind of takes those metrics and kind of tailors them to the site to deliver what's needed for those people. We then have the growth element, quite a few words there, but this is where we kind of create those opportunities. This is very much around where we educate and provide access and help our leaders understand, sounds really basic, but how to listen. And it is really basic, and it's to listen with compassion, empathy, and without judgment. This is about creating safe space. So people are keen to talk, keen to tell us what's happening because they know they'll be supported. And this is where we make all the signposts that we have available clear and accessible for everybody. And it's about giving equity to physical and mental safety. So looking at what we do and how we incorporate looking after our minds at the same time as we look after our bodies. We should all come to work. I'm preaching to the wrong community, but we should all come to work and leave in the same state, both physically and mentally, as what we did when we arrived. And our managers need some support in that area. They need to understand, a stress risk assessment isn't just a tick box. A return to work isn't just a tick box. These processes and these forms can really help us understand what's going on for an individual and help them stay at work rather than feel that they need to be absent. It's about increasing confidence. If we go back to the internal drivers, not all of our leaders are confident to have those conversations. Not everybody is a people-y person and feels comfortable having those conversations, but it's about ensuring they know what to do in those circumstances. And then the very top is more the remedial kind of focus. This is about helping people to cope more effectively. So should they be struggling, we've got very clearly identified signposts. We're in the process of implementing mental health first aiders. Occupational health are being trained, and we're linking in with specialist area experts to help us do this. And it's very much around the ask twice, listen and signpost kind of methodology. And it's all wrapped up in a very comprehensive communication campaign. So Wellbeing Wednesday blogs worked. It's a very established comms channel. They're still very much a huge part of what we do and how we share information. And they're still very apparent within the organisation. So all of this can't be just done by me because I'm one person and that is a lot of work. It's hugely important that we have the appropriate network available. Everyone has a role to play. We all have mental health. This is about peer-to-peer support as well, not just about employee and line manager. It's not just the responsibility of the leader. We all have a responsibility to look out for each other and just be humans. And this relationship diagram just kind of shows you some of those roles that we have firmly in place. So our wellbeing champions are a network of colleagues who volunteer across the group, and we currently have around 60 active champions across the business who promote wellbeing activities, and they push up. They're the eyes, ears, and voice of our wellbeing strategy, and they're people who share the passion. They're people who want to make a difference, and my role in that is to ensure that they're trained and equipped to be advocates on all things that are wellbeing, and they know what's happening and what we're doing from a corporate perspective and how they can use that to really make a difference at site level. Then we have our mental health first aiders, and we're currently in the process of implementing these. We have 2 cohorts currently who I am putting together a support program for, because it's hugely important that they also have support in order to do the role. They have a greater understanding of the impact of poor mental health, and they're there in the moment of emotional mental health distress. You know, they are the top of the pyramid. So by the very nature at the top of the pyramid, there's less of them, and that's less of the focus. Our focus is more in the proactive than the reactive. And as I mentioned on the kind of last slide, occupational health, whilst we have an internal team, they're also being trained in mental health first aid, and it's not to act in the capacity of first aiders, it's to ensure that we're reinforcing that whole person approach. So it's not just about if someone has they've injured themselves, or they need a check-in before they go back to work, or it's a musculoskeletal and we need to think about how we help support that individual from getting back into work. It's also then equipping them further to ask more questions and make the link between the mental and the physical. So it's very much about reinforcing that equity and that parity of approach. You know, and it's fairly clear. You know, we all have a responsibility, and whilst they're not in this particular network, our health and safety teams, we talk about it at every group SHE meeting. We look at the health and wellbeing metrics, and we explore what's going on site by site. You know, we are all very firmly responsible for ensuring that we're protecting people. And clearly, we can't do all this on our own. We're not experts. You know, we are learning as we go. And it's hugely important that we tap into the right supports. We have an employee assistance program who we utilise for a lot of our information. We have a financial wellbeing partner. As I said earlier, we're a member of Business in the Community, and there's a couple of smaller suppliers that we utilise and tap into for our training. A lot of information on this slide, but it's just to show in terms of our initial program is very much it's a couple of years, 2-3 years, and this very much focuses on the mental health piece. But clearly, as we start to move through the pandemic, not only does the mental health piece become quite apparent, because we won't know the lasting effects of that on people yet. You know, we're still going to be seeing that for time to come, but it's also thinking about the financial impact on people. You know, we have had people furloughed. We have had people who, you know, their relatives have lost jobs. You know, there's an impact on the household. So it's then starting to move it into some of the more kind of specialist areas of wellbeing to ensure that we're tackling the root cause and not just kind of focusing on kind of how we react to the mental health kind of emergency. It will evolve. The very nature of our organisation is continuous improvement. We'll learn, we'll change, and we'll evaluate and look at what works for the organisation. I said this before the call started. You know, there's no one size fits all. Every organisation is very different. Wellbeing is hugely subjective. The core backbone of what we're doing won't change, but everything we do in terms of the detail will clearly flesh out in accordance to what each site needs. And as we react and try to kind of proactively kind of look at what's happening out there in the wider environment, there's quite a lot of unknown right now, but it's about having our kind of eyes and ears open and listening in order to kind of help support our people. And it's just left for me to say thank you for listening to me babble on. I'm more than happy to, I'm going to come out of my presentation now, and I'm more than happy to take any questions that people may have.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yep. We've got a couple of questions for you, Claire. Great presentation, by the way. It was fabulous. We've had quite a good few comments through the chat.
Thank you.
Our first question from Angela Abbs was, how are you upskilling your managers to recognise poor mental health indicators?
Yes, so what we have designed is a kind of mental health programme. Sounds very grand, but we have a learning architecture within our organisation that's very much based on see, learn, do, teach, coach. So there's kind of 5 clear stages, and the C level is very much around building that awareness. We have just in the end throes created 2 e-learning self-service modules that people can access. So that's the starting point. We're looking at everybody. So if we think whole person, whole organisation, there's 2 modules: mental health awareness. So we set the tone and we're looking at kind of the terminology and piece across the business and how we help build positive resilience. So again, looking at a proactive piece. Our second level is aimed very much at anybody in charge of a person or a process, is kind of how I've determined it. So that's kind of where we start to kind of get a bit more into detail. It's for leaders. So it's understanding mental health within the workplace. So it will take them through in very clear detail what to look for, subtle signs, and if nothing else, if you spot something, how to have the conversation and how to signpost. So the detail sits very much within our education programme, and we're hoping, I'll find out this week, to launch it in line with World Mental Health Day in October.
Brilliant, thank you.
That's the question.
Yeah, it was great. A second question from Simon Rosso. Is, have you been able to differentiate between the white collar and blue collar wishes regarding working from home and the reality of what is possible for them? If so, is this reflected in the results of the survey?
That's a very good question. The majority, if we go white collar, blue collar, the majority of people working from home were white collar. So we're thinking commercial colleagues, finance, anybody that can kind of get off site. And that was primarily because our sites were still very much working, active, delivering for our customers. So in terms of our blue collar colleagues, they were still at work on the whole. We did do some pulse checks, so we didn't kind of ignore them. That was very much our working from home survey because it was very new to a lot of people. We did do pulse checks within our warehouses. We did do that kind of check-in to understand what is impacting them. The biggest piece of work for blue collars is actually happening right now, and that's with the impact of people coming back into the workplace. What we've seen, because they've clearly had more space, you know, we've had the 2-metre social distancing, we've had all the rules in place. Now with the thoughts around people coming back into the workplace, we're now seeing those individuals who have been at work throughout, we're now seeing the anxiety and concerns raise in them with the impact, the possible impact, and in their eyes, what they see is an increase in risk from those individuals who have been sat at home, kind of coming back into the workplace. So whilst I don't have any of those figures to kind of share with you, we are doing kind of similar kind of pulse checks to understand how people are feeling, to ensure that we can reassure them as well. And we've delayed returning to the office as part of that kind of response. You know, we'll look at kind of the impact of COVID cases with the schools returning. You know, there's a number of factors we're taking into consideration in terms of at what point we start to drip people through. So at the moment, our rules are very much, you know, people are still working from home until about October at the earliest.
Super, thank you. I've got one final question from Angela. Managers, supervisors are also working to manage in a different way and managing a remote or distant team. Any additional training or guidance given to them in different ways of working?
Yes, so we have created a number of guidelines. As I said, we have worked with a couple of suppliers, so one of those being Oakwood Training, and we have shared a number of guidelines with everyone who are working from home. So, for example, the flexible working and looking at the work-life balance for those individuals early on in regards to having children from working from home. I mean, I had 3 children while I was working from home, doing a full-time job and reacting to everything that happened. It was a nightmare. So it became very apparent very quickly that we had to do some stuff to help people manage that, so they weren't burning out and they weren't working stupid hours. Virtual kind of etiquette in terms of the number of calls you have, how to connect with people, how to engage with them to make sure they're okay, what to look for, because it's very different. You can opt to have your camera off. Well, how do you work around that? How can you visibly see kind of what's going on for an individual? So there were a number of guidelines produced for those individuals, because I mean, I've managed teams remotely previously, so for me it's second nature, but it's understanding what is it that's different to therefore then put the guidelines in place for people who have never done it before.
Brilliant, thank you. We've just had another question come through. It's a good point that mental health first aiders are at the end of the process being reactive when things are reaching crisis. You mentioned adding in support for these volunteers. Have you thought about what this is going to look like? As a psychotherapist, I'm keen to ensure mental health first aiders do not become burdened given the risk.
Absolutely. And this is one of the main, really good question. Thank you. And as a first aider myself, and with my voluntary experience, I've put kind of that hat on to think, right, okay, what do I need to make sure is in place to help people? Because they could become overwhelmed very quickly. And then what I'm doing is impacting those individuals. I'm just shifting it from one group to another. So that support piece, they have a buddy, they have a coach, we have regular check-ins, there is a reporting process once they've had a conversation, all anonymised, but it gives us some data to work from in terms of number of conversations taking place. It also gives them an opportunity to kind of say how they're feeling as a result of that conversation, which is something I took from my voluntary work. So that if they hit, there's 3 particular areas, if they hit, I get a notification and then they get a check-in. They're able to access our EAP as a mental health first aider and kind of debrief and offload and kind of be walked through by one of EAP counsellors in terms of how they deal with that. I insist they all have a self-care plan, and that's pre-going into the role. And there is some additional support that we're putting in place through one of our trainers to ensure that they get the opportunity to kind of offload. So it's hugely important. And that's why we're piloting it to start with, because we want to make sure they're implemented properly, they get the right support. And there's a particular cohort working with me to kind of feed back in terms of some of the nuts and bolts, I suppose, what happens on a site. Hopefully that answers your question. There's a lot of stuff.
Thank you. Just one last question. How different is wellbeing required for different demographics? How resilient are most of the workforce as per your research?
Okay, so our biggest focus at the moment, as I said, over 75% of our workforce are men. So our biggest focus right now is men's health and encouraging men to talk. They do talk. We've just got to make sure that our signposts and the support we put in place isn't gender specific. So, we need to think about some of the signposts that would encourage men to talk. So there are some really great men's health groups around. So it's ensuring that we're starting to open up the dialogue a little bit to understand what really matters for them. That's our biggest piece right now in terms of men's health. So we are working with Oxfordshire Health to kind of really break that one down in terms of what that looks like over the next coming months.
Super. And I do have one final question, and it's somebody's asked, Claire, who supports you?
It'd be wrong of me to say the gin bottle, wouldn't it? So
that would be my answer.
No, I don't self-medicate. So who supports me? My line manager is amazing. I have a very clear kind of self-care plan of my own. So I exercise, albeit as I said to the committee earlier, I'm just getting over COVID, so hugely frustrating. I've not been able to kind of do some of my self-care plan, but I have a great network within the organisation. My previous team are hugely supportive. I have a coach of my own, so yeah, I do get all of the support both internally and externally that I need, and I can also call our EAP if I need some real support.
Brilliant, Claire. So that's all the questions that we have for today. I think I'm passing over to Bernard or Ewan.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Yeah, well, it's just some final closing remarks. Claire, that was brilliant. I think there's a lot to take away from that in terms of how we drive mental health and kind of well-being forward. The thing I got from it, as you said before, you know, it's a very dynamic situation for every organisation. I'm a mental health first aider myself within the kind of construction arena, and you know, it's a lot to take away from that. So really thank you. On behalf of the rest of the IOSH Staffordshire branch, we thank you all wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you all. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was fabulous. Can we just stop on the committee for 3 or 4 minutes afterwards? Claire, you're welcome to stop if you like. Angela, thank you for your questions. I can see you're still there. Angela absolutely dangling my chair down there. Thank you very much. Really great session.
I'll talk to you tomorrow, Brenton.
I'll see you tomorrow, Angela. Yeah, some great questions come in today, and a really insightful session. So thank you, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, they're slowly leaving.
Brenton, I'll be in 1 minute.
Yeah, that's fine, Bernard. We won't be long.